So I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible, also as informal as possible. So I'm going to stand here because she's trying to video record this thing. But I wanted to make this as interactive as possible. My main goal for you tonight is to feel more comfortable with kids that you work with who have special needs. I do work for the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, or CARD, which you may or may not be familiar with. It is part of the University of Florida. But my background is in general special education. I'm also a behavior analyst by trade, so primarily I get called in on cases where the child in question has a challenging behavior of some kind. So I do specialize in autism, but I have familiarity with all types of disabilities. So please, if you have kids in mind or you have general questions, feel free to ask them. Two things by way of housekeeping. First, make sure you signed in out there because you need the form for signing in, and I also need a form that shows who I trained today. I'm also going to pass these around. Everybody just take one professional development evaluation form, and then one card. It has an A on one side and a B on the other. Okay, so just 2 minutes on CARD in case you're not familiar with it. CARD is a state-funded program. Florida is the only state in the country that has such a program. It's 26 years old. It'll be 27 years old in January. And the program is basically a free of charge service for anyone who works with individuals with autism and other related disabilities. So obviously we work a lot with schools, we work with hospitals, we work with any organization such as yourselves that works with children. But we also, you should know, work with not just children on the spectrum, but also adults on the spectrum. So once you have autism, you have it forever, and so we also support adults. We provide a lot of technical assistance, so that would be going into the environment, the school, the hospital, the church, whatever, and providing support to the individuals there. We provide individual assistance, which is going into the home and supporting the family. We do a lot of training, such as the one I'm doing right now, and those are all based on requests. So anyone can call and ask, can you give us some training on this particular topic? So we encourage you to reach out to CARD if you ever need anything. We are happy to come back out and do more trainings. If you have an event going on and you want some support, we're happy to do that as well. That's all I was going to say about CARD today. I wanted to start out, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about all the challenges that kids with disabilities present. So I wanted to start out by talking about things that make kids with disabilities kind of awesome. So kids with disabilities, and in particular autism, I'm probably going to come back to that quite a bit. They tend to have really great memories. They tend to have a great deal of passion for a particular topic. And if you can find one that has a 4-H passion, they're going to be your most loyal customer. They're going to keep coming back because kids on the spectrum, they like to become experts in a certain topic or a certain area, and they like to share that expertise with everyone else. They tend to be really good rule followers. That's good because they follow your rules. That's bad because they want everybody else to follow the rules. And one of the challenges of kids with autism is that they have a difficult time making friends. And so if you're the bossy kid who tells everybody what to do, and when they're not following the rules, you get called out, not the best way to make friends. So, but on the other side of the coin, they're really good at following your rules when you put them into place for your different events. They have great attention to detail. That means they're very detail-oriented, and they like to follow through with any activity. Even if it's a non-preferred activity, they're going to want to see it through to the end, which is a really good quality to have. They tend to be very creative. They have a desire to see things to completion, as I mentioned. They tend to be on time. That's one of the rules they like to follow. And they tend to have very great visual and perceptive skills. Do you know who Temple Grandin is? Temple Grandin? She's sort of in your field. So that's why I picked her. So Temple Grandin is an adult with autism. She was, yes.
She developed the cattle.
Yes, she did. That's right.
Okay. I was like, wait, this is good. Yeah.
That's right. So she's famous in my world because she's a very successful adult on the spectrum, and she has taught a lot of professionals who work with people on the spectrum what it feels like and what that experience is like, which helps us a great deal. In your world, she's also known for humane cattle chutes, I guess is the right word, to lead the cattle to slaughter in a humane and comforting way. She tends to see, sorry?
They call it quiet.
Quiet? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so in a quiet quiet way. And there's a movie about her, it's a great movie, but there's many books written about her. She writes about your field and she writes about my field, probably about equally now, and she speaks about both of them. In fact, you have had her here a couple of years ago, and she had just as many talks on autism as she had on agriculture and on cattle and etc. That's her favorite field, is cattle. Anyhow, we learn a lot from her, and she is a great example of having really good visual perceptive skills. She is able to close her eyes and envision something in great detail and then draw it and make it come to life. That's actually how she does design her cattle chutes. But in that way, we know that learners with autism learn best when they have a visual representation of something, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today. On the flip side of the coin, they have lots of challenges. More than that are listed here, but here are some of the big ones. They have a difficult time relating to others. This is important to note, that it's not that they don't want to relate to other people, it's not that they don't care about others or want to have relationships, it's just that they're not very good at it. Social skills don't come naturally to them. So there's a difference between being shy and having autism, right? Being shy is you have your social skills, you're just reticent to use them. Having autism, you're reticent to use skills you don't have. You're not very good at them. I don't know about you, but in school I was not very good at math, and so I tried to avoid it whenever I could. And still, today, I try to avoid math whenever I can, because it's not a strong suit for me. The same is true for people with autism. They tend to shy away from social situations because they're not very good at socialization. Therefore, it looks like they're being antisocial, when in fact they're not. They have quite the desire to be social. And so opportunities like 4-H provides for kids to work in small groups and larger groups and take direction from one or many adults is a great opportunity for them. We encourage club participation and sport participation because it helps kids be able to practice some of those skills, even more so than in school. You know, school, if you've got children especially, you know that school is really academic these days. There's not a whole lot of time for anything else. Teachers just don't have the luxury of teaching social skills and negotiation and problem solving and all those things. They are too busy trying to teach the curriculum that's been put forth for them to teach, unfortunately. So what results is a whole lot of kids, with and without autism, that don't have very good social skills. And so that's where you guys come in, being able to provide an organization and events for kids where they can practice working as a team, having a goal in mind to be able to do a certain thing or create a certain product is really exactly what we recommend kids on the spectrum do. So hopefully you'll see even more of them join your organization. They have difficulty both identifying, labeling, describing, and managing their emotions. So even if they can say, I feel frustrated, I feel worried, I feel upset, they don't know what to do with that emotion. So, and I'm talking about a teenager who might respond to an emotional situation the way a 4 or 5-year-old would, right? So they have the capacity to have emotions, for sure, even though you might not be able to see it on their face. They're having emotions, they just don't know necessarily what to do with those. They have a hard time being flexible. They are rule followers, as I mentioned. So if you have a regular routine for your event, and they came to your last event, and now they're coming to another event, and you've changed the routine, that's going to really throw them, and they're going to have a hard time with that. Same is true if they have a substitute teacher, or same is true if they're not able to go out to the playground that day because it's raining. Things that involve having to be flexible and open-minded are very hard for kids on the spectrum. They have a learning issue around language, and so since they can't ask for clarification about why things have changed, they prefer for things to stay the same. They also have an issue with what we call executive functioning, which is kind of like the fact that your brain is sort of running an orchestra, right? You've got more than one thing going on at all times. You're able to multitask and, for the most part, do those tasks in a relatively adept way. Kids with autism have a really hard time with that. They don't have an orchestra conductor who can help them manage different things in their brain at one time. They also have challenges with what we call central coherence, which is kind of seeing the bigger picture. So I was with a kid, actually, it was a science class, and we were in the woods, and they had binoculars, and they're looking for birds. They had put bird feeders out, and they're trying to track these birds and identify these birds. And so the kid has the binoculars, and he's very clearly pointing the binoculars right toward the bird, and the teacher says, "What do you see?" And he says, "There's one green leaf on that tree, all the other ones are brown." And we were like, well, that's true, but that's not really what we were going for, you know. So they tend to see something that's not the bigger picture. We're out here looking for birds, man. You're looking right at a bird, and you're telling me about the brown leaf, right, or the green leaf. And so we have a hard time sometimes getting them to understand. This is why kids with autism have a hard time with reading comprehension. Because they'll read a paragraph or a whole story, and then when you say, what was that story about? They'll say, on page 14, the girl had a green hat on. Well, that's true, but that's not what the story was about. And so they have a hard time with that central coherence theory. And then lastly, a concept called theory of mind, which in my mind is the biggest one. Theory of mind involves being able to take the perspective of another person. It involves being able to say that I understand that you and I can have different opinions, you and I can have different experiences, you and I can have different emotions at the same time. A person with autism thinks that all information is shared, so what I have in my head, you have in your head. Think about that for a second. If you, any kind of relationship that you might have, whether it's a relationship with a spouse, or a sibling, or a parent, or a child, or whoever, a coworker, if you walk around in the world thinking that your coworker or your spouse and you have all the same opinions, how's that going to go? It's not. It's not going to go very well, because on the night when you want Mexican and they want Chinese, and you can't understand that we have two different opinions here, that's going to be a problem, right? That's actually one of the biggest reasons why people with autism have a hard time making and keeping friends, and also why they have a hard time getting and keeping a job. We have a great big population of people with autism now that are in their 20s and 30s and so on. Autism's been around for a while now. And these people can get a job, they're very smart, but they can't keep it because they can't help but tell their boss that their tie is really ugly. Because they're compelled to tell the truth, they're compelled to help you out. The person with autism would think they're helping you to tell you, your haircut looks really bad. You should fix that, I'm helping you, right? They don't understand how that information from the perspective of another person might come off differently than a fact. Make sense? Okay. So now I'm going to share a video. I told you I'm going to try to keep you happy from listening to me for 2 hours. So here's a little video. And it's one of my favorite short videos to explain kind of what autism is in sort of a lighthearted way. Let's cross our fingers. It played before, so.
Wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't see are favorite foods, ears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck. But some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same world. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We all develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or not. Remember, just because a PlayStation can't read an Xbox game, it doesn't mean it's broken. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to learn. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share their view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
Okay, so I chose to show you guys that video. It's very childish, but I chose to show it because it's a very simple visual representation of what we think it feels like to experience autism, but also because I'm here to kind of give you a couple tips on how to work with kids with autism, but you're going to have other kids. And so this is one of the best ways I know to explain autism to other kids, to explain what that experience is like, because you're going to find that it might be great to recruit some of the kids that you work with, the neurotypical kids that you work with, to help draw in the kid with autism into the event or activity that you're doing. Okay, so regardless of the type of disability that you're working with, or the type of kid with autism, etc., that you're working with, the best way to help them is to start by understanding their behavior. As I mentioned, I'm a behavior analyst, so I can go into a great lot of detail about this because I think it's cool and interesting, but I'm going to stick to the basics today. And the basics are to have this basic perception of why people choose to behave the way they choose. So the first thing is to understand that when a child engages in a behavior, both a positive or a negative one, it's because they're trying to send you a message, they're trying to tell you something. Even if they're very verbal and they have all their verbal skills about them, it doesn't mean that they're not going to use behavior to tell you something. And if you have a child of your own, or if you're used to being around children, as I'm sure you all are, you know that even the most verbal kids use behavior to tell you something, right? The goal for us is to focus on the behaviors that get in the way of socialization and independence and participation in activities such as yours. So the goal is to start by understanding why the behavior happens, and then systematically figure out, can I prevent this behavior from happening? So let's say that the kid's behavior is to scream and yell when they don't get their way, or when something has changed, or they just decide to refuse to participate, for example, or they won't do a certain thing, or they won't stop doing a certain thing. The goal is to say, why is this behavior happening, and then what can I do about it? Can I prevent it, and what do I do when it does happen? So you start out by understanding that behavior happens for a reason. It's not random, and it's purposeful, it's meaningful. So anytime that a child is engaging with you, it's because they want to be there, they want to be engaged. If they're disengaged with you, there's only two reasons. It's either because they don't know what they're supposed to do, or they don't want to do it, and that's it. I say the same thing to teachers. If you have a kid who's not engaged with the activity that you're presenting, it's either because they can't do it, or they don't want to. And so if they can't do it, then we have to figure out a way to modify the activity so that they can participate. If they don't want to do it, then we might have to think about a way of motivating them to want to participate, which is a whole different ballgame, okay? The other way to think about the behavior is to think about it as having a function or a purpose, a communication message, or what I like to call the thought bubble. So if you ever read a comic strip, you know that when someone's talking, there's a speech bubble, right? And when someone's thinking, there's a thought bubble. What I want you to do is to be able to see a child's behavior and picture a thought bubble over their head. What would be in that bubble? And that's how you know what the function of the behavior is. So this is kind of what it looks like in practice. There's a kid in the candy store, and the kid sees candy in a store. The kid starts to cry. The mom doesn't want to hear the crying, so she hands over the candy, and then what does the kid learn? Crying gets me candy. This is awesome. And I'm going to do that again the next time I see some candy that I want because it worked great the last time, right? This is how all human behavior is. This has nothing to do with whether or not you have a disability or a language delay or any of those things. It simply has to do with how humans behave. Those rat experiments and pigeon experiments and Pavlov's dog and all that stuff, all the same stuff, all learned behavior, okay? So the main goal in understanding this circle or this sequence is to understand that the kid is getting what he wants, right? But who else is getting what they want?
Mom.
The mom. And what is the mom getting?
Silence.
Silence, that's right. So I would say in behavior terms, I would say the kid is getting candy and the mom is escaping a meltdown, right? And that's what it comes down to. In this world, there are only two reasons why people act. You can take this home and tell your loved ones. It's either to get something or get away from it, and that's it. And in this case, the child is trying to get something, candy, and the parent is trying to get away from something. A tantrum, a meltdown, crying, humiliation in the grocery store, however you want to characterize it. And so that's the pattern we have to stop the cycle for, okay? Somebody, if this pattern continues, it's because somebody, or in this case, two somebodies, are getting what they want out of the scenario. Now, back in the olden days, when a child was demonstrating a challenging behavior, we would say, this kid is trying to manipulate us. We can't let this kid manipulate us, so we're going to punish this behavior. So now every time the kid screams, he gets sent to timeout. Scream, timeout. Scream, timeout, right? Well, the problem with this scenario is that we never stop to say, well, why is he screaming? What's the screaming trying to communicate? And so even if the timeout works and we get rid of the screaming, the child still doesn't have a way to communicate that message. So let's say the child's screaming to get your attention, which is a pretty, likely scenario, right? So now you've said, every time you scream, you're going to timeout. But what have you not taught the child to do?
Communicate.
What's that?
Communicate.
Get your attention the right way, right? Communicate, I need help, come over here, hey you, whatever, right? And so even if we can get rid of the screaming, if the child still doesn't have a way to get my attention, he's going to come up with another way. And 9 times out of 10, it's worse than the screaming. Now he's going to start hitting himself or hitting other kids or flipping over furniture or tearing up things or something. So what we have learned since the olden days is that you can't just try to punish away a behavior, you have to replace it with something else. So I can say screaming is not allowed. That's not an acceptable way to get my attention. And there may be even a consequence for that. But what's more important is to say, if you want my attention, this is the way you have to do it. I'm going to teach you an alternative, a replacement, and every time you use that new behavior, I'm going to give you what it is that you wanted. So basically I'm saying, don't do it the old way, do it this new way. Make sense? Any of you have children of your own? This stuff works with them too, just saying. So in the world of behavior analysis, everything is very black and white. I like it that way, and here's what it looks like. There's an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence, also known as A and B and C. So the antecedent is the trigger. It's the thing that sets your behavior in motion. So if you say to the group, okay, group, give me an example of something you might tell your group to do. Today we're going to
Go on a walk.
go on a walk. That can be a trigger for some kids. 95% of the kids will be like, yes, a walk, I love to walk. Then there's that one kid who's going to be like, I'm not going for no walk, I didn't come here to go walking, I can go walking at my own house, I don't want to walk, I'm tired, right? The fact that you announced that we're going for a walk today could be a trigger for somebody's behavior. It might be a positive behavior, like, hooray, a walk, and it might be a not so positive behavior. The point is that all behaviors have a trigger. So when somebody says to me, I don't know, he was fine, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he starts screaming and yelling. Well, there was a trigger of some kind. You might not have noticed it or been able to observe it, but there was a trigger. You don't answer your phone, pick it up and say hello unless it rings, dings, vibrates, or sings to you, right? If it's just sitting there quietly, you don't pick it up and say hello. There's no trigger. When there's no trigger, there's no behavior. And that's what prevention is. When you can prevent a behavior, you're basically eliminating the trigger, okay? The behavior itself is what the person did or didn't do. So if you say, we're going for a walk, and I plop down on the floor, crisscross applesauce, and cross my arms and say, I'm not going for a walk, that's a behavior. I'm refusing to do the behavior. Or, everybody starts walking away to start the walk, and I just stand there. The fact that I'm just standing here, that's also a behavior. It's a refusal behavior, okay? So it can be something that the person does or doesn't do. And then, of course, the consequence is whatever follows that. Growing up, the word consequence meant something negative to me, like there's a consequence for that. But what I really mean is anything that follows the behavior. So if I say, if you're able to do these 3 tasks, you're going to get 15 minutes to watch TV, whatever you want. That's a consequence, right? That's a reward in that case. The goal is to set up a scenario where the kid wants to access the consequence. And so instead of screaming, if you come over and say my name, I'm going to give you a positive consequence for that. Behavior occurs repeatedly. Let me say this. Behavior occurs the first time as a fluke. Behavior occurs repeatedly because you want to gain access to that reward again. Do any of you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, but Dr. Phil, if any of you have ever watched him before, he likes to say, how's that working for you? What he means by that is, like the classic example is there's this woman, she's sitting up on a stage and the tissues are flying and she's talking about how she's racked up $50,000 in credit card debt. And he sits there and he listens politely and then he goes, and how's that working for you? And what he's saying is, you might be miserable that you have all this debt, but you're shopping for a reason. There's a reason. And so you're getting a consequence. Something is happening when you go shopping that makes you want to do it again and again. Just like a bad habit. If you bite your nails, or you smoke, or you say bad words, or whatever it is, you're doing the behavior for a reason, even if it's a behavior you wish you didn't do. And so in order to change the behavior, you have to acknowledge that it's happening, and you have to realize that there's a reason that you're doing it. In the case of over shopping, it could be because it distracts her from her real problems, or it could make her feel good to buy things for other people, or she has a hoarding problem, which is a whole other thing, right? The goal is to say, I'm doing this behavior for a reason, and if I want to change the behavior, I have to understand the reason. Okay? So in the real world, this is how we learn this as human beings. There's a thunderstorm, I start to cry, and mom comes running over with hugs and kisses and bunnies on strings. Assuming that I like hugs and kisses and bunnies on strings, what's going to happen the next time it starts to rain and thunder? I'm going to cry, right? I'm going to cry. Why did I say assuming that I liked hugs and kisses and bunnies on strings? Why does that matter?
If it was a negative, you wouldn't want it again, so you wouldn't cry.
That's right. If it was a negative response, if mom reprimanded me for crying, or what if I just don't like hugs and kisses and bunnies on strings, and I'm not going to go out of my way to get them next time, right? So the consequence is always where it's at. The consequence has to be something that you know the kid will change their behavior to get, which is different than a reward. Like my daughter, she loves stickers, okay? She loves them. But I'm not going to be able to say to her, listen, clear all the dishes and put everything away and make your lunch and I'll give you a sticker. That's not going to work. Just because she likes stickers doesn't mean she's going to change her behavior to get one. She's also 8, by the way, so probably not going to happen. So I have to make the behavior change worth the person's while. Similarly, if I present the kid with a task and he does the task, and I give the kid a high five and I cheer for the kid, assuming that they like high fives and cheers, what are they going to do the next time they're presented with a task? They'll do it. They'll do it. So that's what behavior modification in the old language used to mean, is that we modify. You can't really change a child's behavior, I'll tell you that right now. What you can do, though, is change the environment and change your behavior around the child, and that's what changes child behavior. That doesn't matter if you're a teacher or a coach or a parent or whatever. The only way to change the child's behavior is to change the environment and your role in that situation. So I talked about antecedent. What's another word for antecedent? Trigger. Very good. So the antecedent is the thing that triggers the behavior. If the antecedent doesn't happen, there is no behavior, right? There's also something before the antecedent, and we call this a setting event. A setting event is what happens before the behavior. So I was a teacher for a long time, and if a parent brought in their kid in the morning and said, he didn't sleep well last night, good luck, I knew that I was going to have a rough day with that kid, right? That's a setting event. So if he does have a rough day and 2 hours later he throws a book at me, I can't say that's because he didn't sleep well last night, but I can say it's probably related. This is important because we want to have a good idea of what's going on in the child's life before we make too many assumptions about their behavior, okay? So it might be that the trigger's very obvious. You give the child a direction, tell them to do something during your activity, and they don't want to do it, and they start to cry. It might be very obvious, but it could also be that some of this backstory is going on, right? So a lot of the kids that I work with, kids with special needs, are most often on some kind of medication, maybe more than one medication, that's common. So there could be effects of medication. A lot of kids on the spectrum especially, but with different disabilities, they don't sleep well at all. They also don't eat well. They tend to be very picky eaters. So think about how you feel and how well you function when you haven't slept well and you haven't eaten well, right? Not so good. And so that's kind of a standard practice situation for kids on the spectrum. They don't sleep, they don't eat, and they have all different other types of related issues, including challenging behavior in some cases. So if there's some backstory situation going on, they missed breakfast that day, mom's out of town, and so their whole morning routine is thrown off. This is the first time they've ever come to your group and they don't know what to expect. Those would all be considered setting events, okay? As I said, the antecedent is the trigger. It could be somebody coming into the environment, somebody leaving the environment. It could be a demand presented. It could be an environmental stimuli, and that's actually really important for what you guys do. What percentage of what you guys do takes place outdoors? All of it. All of it? Is that accurate?
A lot of it.
A lot of it. A lot of it. Okay, that would have been my guess. So the video sort of briefly touched on this, but kids on the spectrum have very high sensitivity to all different types of sensations, especially smells and sounds. And if you are in the world at large, you can't control the smells or the sounds necessarily that you encounter, right, when you're going on a hike or whatever it is that you're doing. And so just know that there's a good chance that when a child engages in a challenging behavior, it could be because they are experiencing sensory overload with either smells, sounds, textures, etc. If there are things they have to touch, if there are things they have to wear, like a certain sort of, outfit or something that covers them, or a hat for safety, or goggles for safety, or they have to put, an apron on to do an activity, whatever it is, that could be a problem. These are all things that may come into play because of their sensory oversensitivity, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But those things can definitely be triggers. And a lot of times when a person tells me that the behavior happened out of nowhere, it has to do with a sensory trigger. So that's the very first one on the list, sensory input. Also transitions. People on the spectrum have a very difficult time transitioning, especially if it's a surprise. So one of the best things you can do when you have a child with a disability in your group or your class or your activity is to say, here's what we're going to do today. And even better, have visuals that can illustrate that. One of the things I want to mention before I forget is that one of the services CARD offers is we can make you visuals for anything that you need. So we had a tennis organization that came in, they were doing tennis lessons with kids with special needs, and we made visual schedules for them and visual rules and little mini schedules that said, here's how you go about doing this particular tennis activity. Here's how you go about planting a plant. Here's how you go about whatever it might be. So we can make all those things for you free of charge. You just need to let us know what you need, okay? But letting a kid know in advance what the activity is going to involve, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to go outside, then we're going to take a break, then we're going to do this. That's very helpful. Using what we call first then language, which basically means all I'm going to tell you is first this, then this. Because all you might need to know is what's happening now and what's coming up next. Other activities, being told no kid likes that, right? Having a change in the schedule, being told it's time to stop. So one of the pieces of advice we give is if you have, let's say there's 5 minutes left in an activity, you let the kids know that in advance. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes and then it's going to be time to clean this up. Because kids with autism don't like to be surprised, and if they're in the middle of an activity and they're not going to be finished, and you suddenly say it's time to clean up or it's time to be done, they're going to have a hard time with that. Behavior, of course, is anything you can observe the kid to do. So we, in the behavior analysis world, we try to avoid saying things like, he got really frustrated, he got really annoyed, he got really discouraged. Because even if your description is right on, that's not a behavior you've observed, that's just your assumption about the behavior. So if the kid, throws down his whatever, his shovel, his pencil, his whatever he has, you could say, oh, he's very frustrated, and you might be right. But what you want to say is he threw down his fill in the blank, okay? And so when we're targeting behavior, we want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And then, of course, as I said, the consequence is whatever follows the behavior. The goal is you want the consequence to be something that the child wants to gain access to again so that they'll come back for more. So for example, if you decide that you're going to start a new regimen of healthy eating, and your goal is to bring down your cholesterol by 20 points, and you do all this research online, and you pull up all these recipes, and you cook a special meal every night, and you go out to dinner, and you only eat special things, and after a month, your cholesterol has gone up 10 points, are you going to keep doing that? No, because it's not what? It's not working for you, right? So we only change our behavior if it gets us the consequence we want. When I talk to students, I say, what if you decide you're going to use this cool new method to study for a test, and you work really hard and you write out all your notes and you memorize and you practice every night, and then you bomb the test? Are you going to use that same method to study the next time? No, of course not, because it didn't work for you. And so the consequence means that I've gotten access to something that I want, and I'm willing to change my behavior to get that consequence again. As I said, in the long run, at the end of the day, there are only two reasons why kids will behave: to get something or get away from something. And notice how similar these lists are. To get attention or to get away from attention, right? To get comfort or escape discomfort. To get food or drink or to escape it. I don't want that. To get stimulation if I'm understimulated or bored, or to get away from stimulation if I'm overstimulated. To get access to a tangible item like candy in that first example. To get away from a demand or to get away from having to transition. So the lists are very similar for a reason, because again, those are the only things we can be trying to get to. So think about an example in your own life with a child, a spouse, a coworker, a parent, and I bet that you'll be able to determine that it was either to get something, their behavior was either to get something or get away from something. All right, so this is where these little cards that you have in front of you come in handy. We're going to test your knowledge. Which one of these represents a setting event? The child had a headache last night, or a fire alarm rang during our session? Which one would be the setting event, A or B? Very good, it's A. So again, the setting event is the thing that comes before the behavior, right? So if the child has a hard time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you could say, well, they did have a hard night last night, they had a bad headache, right? What would we call B? What's the right word for that? A trigger or an antecedent. Very good, because it happened right before the child presumably had a challenging time. So as I said, the goal with all of this is to be able to replace the inappropriate behavior with an appropriate behavior. And in your case, it's a little trickier because there's a fine line between, this is an optional activity for the kids who participate, right? And so to what extent do you require them to do what they don't want to do, right? The goal is just to increase and encourage their participation. But the same is true, that we're trying to get them to communicate in appropriate ways and not use these inappropriate ways, whatever they might be. In essence, what we're doing is trying to convince them not to use this old behavior, to say, I want to tell you that I don't want to do this anymore. I want to tell you that I need a drink. I want to tell you that I don't understand what the direction was. But instead of screaming or crying, I'm going to do this other thing instead. And so what we do is encourage any kind of appropriate communication. It might be verbal. It might be nonverbal. Even my very verbal kids usually know how to sign some main messages, like take a break, get some water, go to the bathroom, those kinds of things. Because in a moment of distress or stress, even a very verbal kid is going to have a hard time getting their words out. Has that ever happened to you when you're really tired or hungry or stressed out and you can't get your right words out? So what do you immediately start to do? You start to use your hands, right? You'd be like, that thing, on the corner of 39th and 43rd, and it's that big, what I'm talking about, right? You start to immediately use your hands. And so we want kids to be able to have gestures and signs and pictures when possible to be able to communicate in those moments when they can't say what it is they're trying to say. So the most important things that you can ask about a behavior when you're having a challenging time with a kid are, where does the behavior happen, and also where does it not happen? So let's say that every time you do an activity that involves animals, they're loving it, they never have a problem, it's great. But every time you have an activity that involves dirt and getting dirty, they're hating it, right? Well, then you know that there's a big difference there, and we have to try to see, well, what makes one so much better than the other? In a classroom situation, I would want to know what classes does he do the best in and what classes does he struggle the most in, so that I can see what's so magical about math class that he always has a great day, but in science class he's always losing his mind. You know, can we replicate what's going on in math class? And the same would be true for you guys. If you know that there are activities that the child is always willing to participate in, certain types of activities, certain types of events or environments, we want to see what it is about that activity that makes him or her more willing to participate and able to participate. What makes the behavior start and stop? So again, what is the trigger? What made the behavior start? And then usually what makes the behavior stop is the consequence. To say, okay, like if you've ever taken care of a baby, right? They don't stop crying until you give them what they want. You don't know what they want, you're guessing, right? Uh-oh, she's crying. All right, I'll change your diaper. Nope, she's still crying, it wasn't that. Okay, I guess I'll rock her. Nope, still crying. Okay, let's give her a bottle. Oh, she stopped crying. So what did she want? Food, right? So typically people continue to engage in the behavior until they get what they want. So what makes the behavior stop is a good indication that the child got what the consequence was that they were after. Is the child trying to get or get away from something, right? The only two possible options. What is the child trying to communicate? And then how can I replace the behavior? So if it's, I need a break, I'm tired, it's too hot out here, I don't understand the direction, I'm bored, I want a different job, this is hard for me, whatever it is, I need to take a break, where's the bathroom? Those kinds of questions. We want to make sure that they have a way to communicate all those things. And then the most important thing I think I've come to learn over the years is this question. And that is the child not performing because they can't do the skill or they don't want to, which I mentioned at the very beginning. We call this a skill deficit or a motivational deficit, right? So you can't motivate a child to do something that they can't actually do. So if you give them a task and they don't do it, instead of assuming that it's because they don't want to or they're refusing, the first thing you should ask is, am I sure this kid knows how to do this thing? Like, do they understand my direction and can they physically do the thing I want them to do? You can't motivate a kid to do something that they can't do. For example, you could say to me, do you like $500? And I say, yes, I like $500 very much. And you say, okay, well, here's a book. It's in German. Read it. Tell me what it's about, and I'll give you $500. Well, now you've just motivated me to do something that I can't do. So now not only can I not do it, but I'm really mad that I can't do it now because you've offered me a reward that I can't access because I can't do that skill. So we have to be very clear that before we dangle motivators in front of a kid, that we're clear that the reason they're not performing is because of a motivation problem. They don't want to, as opposed to a skill problem. They don't know how to. Yes?
Are kids that have autism, can they flip that? Can they say they can't do it, but really they can, they just don't want to? Is that in their head? Can they do that?
Not usually.
Not usually.
So I'm not going to say with 100%. I have some sneaky kids, but one of the core features of autism is that theory of mind thing, that whole thing about perspective taking. Kids with autism do not typically lie, ever. How would that relate to the theory of mind thing? Can anybody work that out?
They think you already know the truth.
That's right. If you and I have shared it, if what I have in my head is the same information that you have in your head, then I can't lie because you already know the truth, right? So, a perk for autism. In fact, when a parent calls me up and says, he lied to me, I'm like, that's great news, because it means they're starting to understand. Or even tell a joke, it's the same thing, right? To be able to tell a joke means that you know that I don't know the punchline, or else why would you bother telling me the joke? So, to answer your question, typically kids with autism do not lie. Okay? I was just at a meeting this afternoon about a kid who just flat out refusing to do anything all day at school. And of course the teachers are like, this is not acceptable, and he's gonna flunk, and blah, blah, blah. And they're not wrong. I mean, he's gotta do the work. But the first thing I said is, he's not refusing, he's not engaging because he's afraid of being wrong. He has this fear of making a mistake, which is very typical for kids with autism. If they can't do it right the first time, they won't do it at all. And so this kid is classic in that he is saying, I'm not even gonna try. Because if I try and I'm wrong, I've messed up. And I'm a very black and white thinker. So I'd rather not even start. And so all this refusal that looks like, that he's trying to be a brat about it is really, I'm frozen, I can't get started because I'm afraid of making a mistake. And so when I brought this up at the meeting, they were all like, oh, that makes so much sense. And so now, it's not that they're not going to encourage him to work, but they have a better perspective as to why he's refusing. It doesn't look like refusal, like I hate you and I'm not gonna do this work, leave me alone. It's more about, I'm afraid to get started, my perspective is different than yours.
Something like that happened last night on The Good Doctor. Anybody watch The Good Doctor?
The Good Doctor, I was wondering if
So-
somebody would bring that up. Yes.
So that happened last night. He was on his surgery and he stopped it because something was about to go wrong.
And he could anticipate it?
Right, so he had a way to fix it, but he couldn't communicate, but somebody brought it out of him. If you're not watching the show, it's about a doctor that has autism, and all this is kind of bringing all that back.
Good. So there is a lot in the media about autism anymore, and on the one hand, that's good because it's bringing attention to the disorder. On the other hand, it's not good because typically these versions are very Hollywoodized and very far-fetched. The Good Doctor is an example of something that is not far-fetched. I mean, it's far-fetched in that we don't have a whole lot of people on the autism spectrum who can become classically trained surgeons. But all the characteristics that he demonstrates are very classic to autism. And it is a very fair representation of what a person with autism goes through. So I do recommend it. I think it's a great show.
Yeah, in the
The
little
only
clip
show I
you showed earlier where somebody turned the light off, that there was an episode where this light was one of these and it was buzzing.
Yeah.
And he could not function.
Yeah.
I mean, could not function.
And that's what we mean about being overstimulated. So you guys are used to accommodating to the environment. There are people around you, they might have different perfume on, somebody's making a noise with their cup, the light is flickering, and this doesn't take away from your ability to focus, right? You're able to let that stuff go and put it to the side. A person with autism hears and sees and experiences and smells and whatever, all those things at the same volume. It's kind of like in the olden days when you actually had to tune a radio and you were like, oh, I hear somebody talking, oh, I hear a song, oh, I hear some static. You hear all those things literally at the same volume and you don't know what to concentrate on. That's what a person with autism experiences. And so if there's a flickering light that most of us wouldn't even notice and probably definitely not hear, that could be very distracting to a person on the spectrum.
So are you saying that can they change that and develop a skill?
They can.
So they can rewire.
Yes, so the second half of my presentation is going to be all about how to help them do those things. But I wanted to really send home this message that, you know, what's happening is how their brain is wired. They're doing it because this is the only way they know how to do these things, but there are ways to help them accommodate to these things, yeah. Especially the sensory stuff. You know, there's to a certain extent you can modify the environment, but then to a certain extent you can modify the child. So I've got a lot of kids who have noise canceling headphones, or there are these cool new earbud things that go in that allow certain sounds to be disturbed but not others, and you know, so there are a lot of ways that you can help kids accommodate to that. And some of it is what you can provide as part of your program and part of what you offer, and some of it is what parents would provide. Okay, so again, the most important stuff in this whole scenario is what makes the behavior start, what makes it stop, is the child trying to get or get away from something, and does the behavior represent a skill or a motivational deficit? Okay, so if you can ask yourself, if you're confused about the kid's behavior, you don't know how to handle it, you're predicting that a certain situation will be a problem, as you get to know kids, you're going to be like, oh man, we're doing dirt today, they're not going to be into this, or you know, we're doing livestock today, or we're doing planting, or we're doing whatever. You know, when you can start to predict it and anticipate it, then you can prevent it. All right, let's put our cards up again. A skill that a child can do but doesn't want to do is called a skill deficit or a motivational deficit. Very good, a motivational deficit. And so a skill deficit is defined as what?
They can't do it.
They can't do it.
Physically, they can't.
They can't physically, mentally, attention span-wise, they can't do it. So for example, you know, I might have a teacher say to me, well, I know he can read, so I don't understand why he can't just read this chapter. Well, because the chapter's 30 pages long and his attention span is about 2 pages long. That's what I mean about being able to do something, right? It's about your cognition, it's about your physical abilities, it's about your attention span, etc. All right, so how can you help? We're going to take a few minutes break before I get into the second section so you can get up and stretch and get a snack. So take a 5-minute break or so and just move around. Back there, nobody really understands, so it's kind of odd.
There was a larger blanket put on them.
And if you think about it, you know, there are people in our lives that we have known who've always been kind of odd, socially awkward, whatever, and they may qualify for an autism diagnosis. It's not uncommon for us at CARD to get calls from adults who say, listen, my whole life people have been telling me I'm just kind of quirky or nerdy or awkward or weird, or I have ADHD or something, but I really think I have autism, and they'll come in and we will assess them. And lo and behold, they've been misdiagnosed their whole life. So people have been out there, the numbers are increasing, and those are some of the reasons why. And just in case you're wondering, it has nothing to do with vaccines, nothing. There was only one study, nobody really understands this because it was such big press, but there was one study that was done on vaccines many years ago. There were 13 doctors on this study, and they all claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism. And of course, it made everybody go up in arms, and nobody wanted to get vaccinations anymore, etc. Well, the other side of the story that most people don't hear, because it didn't make the news in the same way, is that 12 of the 13 doctors came forward and said, we made that up. And so you don't hear that part of the story. And since then, the whole world has been trying to replicate that, because believe me, if any country got caught immunizing children with something that gave them autism, they would be really in big trouble. And so across the world, people have been trying to replicate that study, and there's no association. So don't fear the vaccine for that reason. Okay, so the most important stuff, now that you know a little bit about autism, you know a little bit about what drives the behavior of kids with autism and related disabilities, the next hour is going to be spent talking about what to do about it, okay? So as I said, if you can prevent these behaviors, that's all you need to do, right? If you prevent the challenging behavior from happening, you don't have to worry about dealing with it. So the goal is to start by trying to understand what is triggering the behavior and making a change to that. And the first thing to do is to assess your environment. So again, if a lot of what you guys do is out in the open world, then you can only do so much to control that. But letting kids know that they're going to be experiencing certain smells or sounds or sights or textures beforehand. Let's say that everybody's got to wear an apron for the next activity. Maybe we're going to feel the apron. We're going to try tying it on different tightnesses to see which one we like best. We're going to get some practice before we do the actual activity. We're going to touch things or smell things or see things before we actually engage with them in the real world, as an example. Also making sure that kids always understand the rules of what's going to happen. So telling them, here's the rules for what we're going to do. Telling them, here's the order of events for today. Those are all ways of giving kids information in advance. A simple thing to do is a transition warning. I mentioned this before. So instead of just saying, okay, stop what you're doing, we're finished, you're going to give a kid a warning and say, 5 more minutes and it will be time to clean up, go on to the next activity, take a break, get water breaks, whatever it is, right? Another thing that we find really helpful for kids with autism is using a timer. So a lot of our kids don't understand the concept of time. So if you say, we're going to be doing this activity for the next 15 minutes, that doesn't really mean much to them. And it doesn't have to. It simply tells them that they know that this activity is coming to an end, even if they don't really know what 15 minutes means. But a timer helps them because you can't argue with a timer. And since so many of our kids have difficulties with transitions, when the timer rings, you can say, well, I guess it's time to be finished. And so they can't be mad at you. It's the timer that's telling them that it's finished, right? So believe it or not, it works, right? It works with our regular kids at home too, right? Like, this works for any activity. It works for any activity that doesn't have a clear ending. So bath time is a great example. You could splash around in that bathtub for 4 hours if you wanted to, right? Or you could take a 10-minute bath. So TV time, computer time, tablet time, playing outside on bikes, whatever it is, those activities that don't have a clear ending, it's great to use a timer because it makes an ending clear and it helps them transition. So I would use these two in conjunction. I would have my timer set for 15 minutes. After 10 minutes, I would say 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 1 more minute, ding, 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 ding. Okay? That's how that would work. I often recommend visual timers. Yes, that's a real thing. So I find that most people in the world, because everybody carries a cell phone now, if you're going to be out and about and you don't have a classroom setting or a building setting, you just have an app on your phone. And there are many apps on your phone. I like the Time Timer app. It basically sets the timer by showing in red. So this timer is set for 45 minutes. And as the time passes, the red disappears. So the kid can see that the red is getting smaller, and he knows that time is getting smaller. That's a way of visually illustrating that. So that'd be a great thing to do when you're out in the community. You can just simply show your phone and say, here's how many minutes we have left for this activity. First Then is great. It's free and it doesn't take anything. It's simply a way of telling kids, now here's what we're doing now and here's what's coming up next. And for a kid with autism who is anxious, that's one of the primary characteristics of autism, is anxiety. Because they're afraid of what's coming up next. They're afraid of surprise. They're afraid they're not going to know what to do or how to ask for help. And so if you let them know, first we're doing this, and then we're doing this, for some kids that's all they need to know. Other kids benefit from knowing the whole routine. We're going to be here, how long is the usual activity with your kids? Could be
30 minutes to an hour?
30 minutes to an hour, right? So some kids can handle knowing what you're going to do that whole 30 minutes. Other kids just need to know, we're doing this, and then we're doing this, okay? And here are some visual examples. Again, if you can make it visual, all the better. So use the language. And also, using first then language keeps you from using too many words. Kids with autism can't process too many words. So what you don't want to say is, okay, everybody, first we're going to do this, and it's going to have 3 steps. We're going to do this first, and then we're going to do that. You're just going to say first this, then this. That's it. Okay? But if you can illustrate it somehow, all the better. So if you have a picture, if you can make a little stick drawing. I even have a lot of people that I know, parents especially, will pull up a picture on their phone, just so the kid can have a visual of what they're going to do. First we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. Again, I said having a schedule or a mini schedule to illustrate what's coming up is a really great way of having kids understand what the expectations are. So you can see that schedules can look like a lot of different things. That first schedule on the top is 3-dimensional objects. So for a kid with vision impairment or a kid who needs more concrete information, you can tell, first I get off the bus, then I have breakfast, that little index card indicates writing, that little spongy number 5 indicates math, and so on. And so that's how they know what's expected. And when an activity's finished, they take it off the Velcro strip, they put it away, it's all done, okay? We have schedules that look more like this for kids who can handle that much information. And then that's my favorite kind of schedule there in the corner. That's one of those Monday through Sunday pill boxes, you know, when you put all your medicine in there. And so on the outside of the pill box is a picture of each of the activities, and on the inside is a piece of candy. So each time the kid engages in the activity and they do what they're supposed to do, you open it up and they get a piece of candy. Sensory accommodations. As I mentioned earlier, sensory needs for kids with autism are very high. This is why kids with autism often engage in body repetitive behaviors or body-focused repetitive behaviors, like rocking or flapping or humming or spinning or bouncing on their toes or walking on their toes or bumping their body into things. There's all ways for them to seek out sensory information, okay? And so one of the things we recommend for structured activities such as yours is to build in short, brief sensory breaks. So if you know that a kid is overstimulated, it would be great to be able to say, after this activity, but before we start this, we're going to have a 5-minute sensory break. And for that child, the sensory break might be going into a quiet, non-smelly, non-bright room for 5 minutes. Or it might be, because I've been sitting and doing an activity at the table, my sensory break might be, you know, running 2 laps around the building, or jumping jacks, or something. Okay? So the idea is if your child is overstimulated, you want to give them a break that it limits their stimulation, quiet, dark, etc. If they're understimulated, if they've been sitting too long, they need an awakening kind of sensory break, which would involve movement. Make sense? Kids with autism particularly seek out deep pressure activities, which would include things like jumping, skipping, hopping, marching, swinging, those kinds of things. So in case you don't have a swing set in the backyard or a trampoline in your room, you can do wall push-ups, you can do marching around the class, etc. Those all provide deep pressure to the child, and that helps them stay calm. The other thing, this is an example, I'm going to be showing you lots of examples of visuals. If any of these visuals appeal to you, we can make them for you. So this would be an example of a visual that I might use with any child to say that you need a break. Make a choice. What kind of break do you want to take? Do you want to get a drink of water? Do you want to sit in the beanbag? Do you want to squeeze into the weighted blanket for 2 minutes? Do you want to take deep breaths? Do you want to rock in the rocking chair? Obviously, we make these custom to represent whatever the choices are in your setting. In the home, in school, during a club, sport, activity. More sensory ideas. A lot of these won't necessarily apply to you, but even things like letting kids have access to water bottles, having a water break can be a sensory break. Making sure that kids are sitting 90, 90, 90. You know what that means? It means that their hip should be 90 degrees in their chair, their knees should be 90 degrees at the end of their seat, and their ankles should be 90 degrees on the floor. If not, you get this kind of kid. Right? The kid who's sliding out of their chair, and then they're not paying attention anymore. So one simple way that you can encourage them to pay attention and wake up during an activity is to sit that way in their chair. Another tip is alternating high energy and low energy activities, as well as high demand and low demand. Demand means that it's hard. Keeping in mind that for kids with autism, the hard activity might not be the most physical or the most cognitively demanding. It could also be the most socially demanding, right? So when you talk about doing something that's easy versus something that's hard, the easy activity might be the really hard crossword puzzle, and the hard activity might be having to talk to my friends about what I had for dinner last night, okay? So you want to alternate between those. If you think about that during your own workday, I know for me, if I'm doing something really difficult and it's requiring a lot of brain power, every once in a while I'll check my text messages or something that doesn't require a lot of brain power and then go back to my work, right? Taking those little breaks to do something easy and lighthearted makes it easier to get back into the tough stuff and focus. This is one of my favorites, and this might come up, so this is important. No kid likes to hear the word no, and as we said earlier, that can be a trigger for a lot of kids. When kids with autism hear the word no, they're such black and white thinkers that they hear never. So let's say that you're going for a walk and they see a cool, something they want to look at, okay? And you say, no, we can't do that right now, we're walking. We can't stop and look at this thing, we have to keep walking. What they hear is never, you're never going to get to look at that thing again, or play with that thing, or see that thing, or touch that thing, okay? So we try to recommend that you don't use the word no, but instead say not available. So you'd say, that's not available right now, and then two things. Redirect to something that is available. If that's not available right now, do you want to do this or this instead? And then secondly, tell the child when it will be available. So no, you can't play with that toy right now, but you can play with it after we come back from our walk, or you can play with it for the 5 minutes at the end of our session, etc. Okay? So not available, a choice of two things that are available, and when that thing will be available. Okay? And visually, we use that universal no symbol to indicate something's not available. Choices are really powerful, so if you have a kid that you think is going to resist doing an activity in your session, one of the best ways you can prompt them to get involved is to give them a choice. And it's not a choice of whether they want to participate or not, it's a choice within the activity. So we're going to be working on a tabletop activity with coloring. Do you want to color with markers or crayons? Do you want to sit at that table or that table? Do you want to use a green and a red marker or a blue and a purple marker? Do you want to share with this kid or this kid? And so on and so on. You can build in a lot of choices to activities that will help kids be more motivated and able to participate and feel like they're making a decision about it. At the end of the day, do you really care what color they color the thing? No, you don't. You just want them to do it. So it's helpful for teachers of all sorts, including camp counselors and session counselors, to recognize that they might be able to increase the opportunity for kids to participate if they offer some choices.
Would you limit those choices though?
Yes, that's the beauty of it. You're totally in control of how many choices you offer and what choices you offer, right?
So with someone that's on the spectrum, would they feel more comfortable with a small amount of choices or a large amount of choices?
In terms of how many things to pick from?
Yeah, like how many colors of crayons to pick?
Yes, so a smaller field is better. And then you can decide, if you're going to say, these three or these three. Do you want these three markers or these three markers, right? Saying something like, pick 5 markers would probably be too open-ended for a lot of our kids.
Gotcha.
Good question. And again, these are things we can visually illustrate. So one of my favorite ways to illustrate choices is this middle one, which is a cookie sheet. And I have my choice board on the cookie sheet, and then I have those little magnets, and each kid has their name on a magnet, and they get to choose what center or what activity they're going to do by putting their magnet on the activity that they're choosing. Okay? Similarly, if I have a child who's upset and needs to calm down, I might give them a choice board offering them options for how they're going to calm down. If there's a writing activity or a drawing activity, you can offer choices about what they write or how they draw, etc. Another tip is what we call modifying expectations, which means that you might say that all of these kids are going to engage in this activity for 20 minutes, but this target kid only has to do it for 5, because that's all they can handle. And then maybe a couple of days from now, they'll do it for 8 minutes and 10 minutes and so on until they can participate the whole time. But instead of trying to push the kid to participate in a 20-minute activity when their attention span is only 5 minutes, it's not going to be cute for any of you. It's going to be ugly, right? And so then the kid's going to walk away going, I'm never doing that activity again. That was not fun. She made me do it for the last 15 minutes, right? And so you say, okay, we're going to do it for 5 minutes, and then you can take a break while everybody else finishes, and then we'll start the next activity, okay? Or, let's say you're doing an activity and you say, okay, everybody else has to collect 5 things, you only have to collect 2 things, right? So you're modifying what you're asking the child to do so that he's more successful and he doesn't get frustrated. All right, flexible seating is an example of sensory prevention or modifying expectations. What do you think? Very good, it's A, sensory prevention, right? So giving kids a way, some kids when they stand up or they get an opportunity to kneel on their seat or they get to bounce on a ball or they get to sit on the floor or lay on their belly to participate is a way of accommodating them by attending to their sensory needs, okay? All right, moving on to teaching strategies. When we're trying to teach kids new stuff, which is part of what you guys do, right? Is teach them new skills in the community, etc. One of the things you want to do is to phrase directions as statements. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, do you want to come sit at the table? Do you want to come do this activity? You're not asking them. It's a direction. You want to say, come to the table. It's time for this activity, right? You don't want to phrase something as a question if it's not a choice. Because if you do, what's the child likely to say? No, I'm good, right? And now you have a problem on your hands. So if it's not a choice, you don't phrase it as a question. So instead of saying, can you sit at the table, you would say, sit at the table, please. Can you help clean up? You could say, it's time to clean up, right? So you're not giving an option for something that's actually a direction. Make sense? And this is just a habit because parents and teachers, etc., everybody, we all do this, right? We think it sounds nicer, but really, then we create a problem when the kid says, no thanks, I don't want to, right? So it's not really a choice. If it's not a choice, it's not a question. You want to make sure that your directions and your behavioral expectations are clear. You want to leave no room for misinterpretation. You want to make sure that the kid understands what you're asking him to do. So for example, clean up is really not a good direction, is it? Because that doesn't tell me what I'm supposed to do. Put the markers in the box and put the crayons in this thing, whatever, that's clearer, right? Except you wouldn't say thing. Get ready is another one. What does get ready mean? Does it mean put my shoes on? Does it mean put my sunglasses on? Does it mean put my jacket on? What does get ready mean? Help, right? Okay, everybody should be helping. I hear that in classrooms a lot. Well, what does that mean, helping? Finish your work, eat, right? We want to be as specific as you can. And you want to use visuals as you can. So visuals that can show your behavioral expectations can be really helpful. That's something you want to do at the beginning of your lesson or your class, and then right before the activity. Yes?
So might it be a good idea to be, like, say you want them to clean up, for example, you might assign a specific task in cleaning up.
I love it. That's right.
So you pick the markers up,
Exactly.
you pick the crayons up, that kind of
That's
thing.
exactly right.
Example.
Because you're not leaving, if the child doesn't do it, then you don't have to wonder to yourself, I wonder if he understood. You know he understood. Now you know he's just not doing it because he doesn't want to. But if you say, okay, everybody clean up, and the kid doesn't do anything, you don't know why. You don't know if it's because he doesn't know what that means or because he's refusing. So that's a great solution. Yes?
Just want to point out too, a lot of these, the directions and things that you're giving us information on, like this specifically, is really good not just for the autism kid, but the ADHD kid, the ADD kid, who needs those steps. You know, it doesn't just cover just the autism kids.
Yeah, I tried to pick out, all of these are research-based strategies for autism, but I specifically tried to pick out the ones that will work for really, I mean, not just any kid with a disability, which is true, but really any of your kids.
That's good, yeah, that's good for regular
Yeah,
folks,
yeah.
too.
Good for
I mean,
adults.
I do more and more with kids who, I do more and more with teachers who teach inclusion, There's not many self-contained classrooms anymore where all the special ed kids go. They're in the classrooms with everybody else. So when teachers come to these trainings and they're thinking they're just gonna learn strategies for their kids with disabilities, they walk away thinking, actually, I could do this with my whole class. And that's the stuff I like to share, because that's your biggest bang for your buck. You know, it's great to do something for one kid. It's even better if it works for everybody.
I think it would be better that way so that the kids that aren't on spectrum don't think that they're being, the
Singled
ones that
out.
are on spectrum are being favored, and the ones that are don't think that they're being, segregated.
That's a good point. I mean, I
Sort of
think
makes
you do.
everybody-
I think you do the universal stuff, and then if a certain kid needs extra, then you provide that. But if these universal things work for everybody, including the kid with special needs, then you don't have to do extra, and that would be great. This next one's it's either called a 3-step prompt or it's called Say, Show, Help. And essentially what it means is, when you get to that position where you say, go to the door, go to the door, go to the door, it's time to go to the door, go to the door, everybody's at the door, come on, go to the door, right? You don't want to get into the habit of giving a direction over and over, because what that teaches the child is, I can wait till you say it 15 times before I actually have to do anything, right? So I'm just going to kick back here for a while until you get to 12 or 14, and then I might think about getting up, right? We don't want that. We want, you give it a direction, you follow the direction, period, the end. So, you give the direction verbally, and then you wait. If the kid does it, great. If not, you give the direction again, and you add a gesture, right? And then if the kid still doesn't follow through, then you give the direction again, take the child's hand, and you help them do the direction, okay? So essentially they get 2 chances to do it on their own before you help them follow through. But this is when we don't do this, we get what we call a very prompt-dependent kid, which basically means that they're waiting for the world to take care of them, and they're just going to kick back and do the least amount possible. And so we want to make sure that kids know that if it's important enough for me to say to you, it's important enough for you to follow through with. In the world, when I work with kids in their homes, I often tell parents, if you're not willing to hang up the phone, turn off the stove, or get off the sofa, don't give the direction. Because you have to assume that if the kid needs that 3rd step, you have to stop what you're doing and help them follow through. Otherwise, they learn to ignore you, right? Get your shoes, it's time to get your shoes, wear your shoes, I told you to get your shoes. And then what do? You either forget it or you do it for them, right? We don't want that. None of that business. Another tip is called the fair pair rule. This means that instead of telling kids what not to do, you're going to tell them what to do instead. So instead of saying don't run, what would you say?
Walk.
Please walk, walking feet, slow feet, quiet feet. Somebody calls it marshmallow feet today. There's always something new. I go to schools almost every day and I hear, today it was kindergarten, so anything goes in kindergarten, but it was like bubblegum lips and marshmallow toes or something like that. That was how they were supposed to walk down the hall. But that made no sense to me, but they knew what it meant because they had practiced it before in the classroom, which is rehearsal, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So again, instead of saying don't do that, we don't do this, don't run, don't touch, don't jump, don't whatever, you're going to tell them what you want them to do instead, okay? Partial verbal prompts is one of my favorite things. So we get into the habit as grown-ups of giving a lot of full verbal prompts. Go to the door, put on your shoes, clean up, don't do that, etc., right? And so instead, we want to give the kid a little bit more responsibility. So instead of saying, this would look like this. Okay, everybody take out your box of crayons. And then the one kid doesn't do it, and you say, take out the box of crayons, box of crayons, box of crayons, box of crayons. Here, I'll do it for you, right? So instead, I would say, okay, everybody take out your box of crayons. My kid doesn't do it, I would say, what was the direction? Or look around, what are your friends doing? Or what are we supposed to be doing right now, right? So I'm still using my verbal language, but instead of telling the kid the answer, telling them what to do, I'm prompting them to figure it out. And this is a really important life skill, because if you remember, in high school, for example, if you're busy chatting with your friend and you didn't hear the teacher say to turn page 57, what's the first thing you're going to do? Look around. What page are we on, right? So it's a really important skill to be able to use your environment to figure stuff out. And it also keeps us from teaching kids that they can wait, again, to be told something 15 times before they have to follow through. That's one of my favorites. And then ignore junk behavior. So we're going to be dealing with kids with a variety of needs, and some of those needs are not dangerous, and they're not disruptive, they're just plain old annoying. Don't bother dealing with the annoying behaviors right now. If you've got a kid who makes a little noise or flaps his hands or whatever, unless it's taking away from the learning and your ability to do your job and the learning of the other kids, I would ignore it. We call that junk behavior. One of my favorite examples of junk behavior is banter. So kids who want to argue with you and go back and forth about something, no. You're playing right into that. We just don't do banter. Don't do banter. And then another tip is to decrease downtime. So when kids have free time or unstructured time or time when they're not sure what's supposed to be going on, maybe this happens sometimes in between activities, for example, or maybe if you're setting up an activity and the kids are waiting for you to set up, that's what we call downtime or unstructured time. That's when kids get into the most trouble,
Yeah.
right? Because they got nothing to do, they're gonna fill their time with something, and it's probably not gonna be something cute, right? So now, you concur?
Idle hands, the devil's work.
That's right. That is absolutely true. I should put that on here. So what we do is we encourage you to have like backup activities. Like, okay, first of all, if you're setting up for an activity, get the kids involved. Instead of saying, okay, just wait till I set the table up for our next activity, get them to help you do that. Then they won't be idle, right? But if there is an idle moment in between activities or during transitions, and that's gonna happen, then there should be something for them to do. Maybe it's a coloring worksheet or books that they can look at or something. I call them busy boxes or busy folders or something for them to keep them occupied. If they're only waiting a couple minutes, they need to learn how to do that. But if they're going to be waiting for more than 5 or 10 minutes, I would try to institute something where they have something to keep them occupied while I wait activities. Errorless learning is a teaching strategy that I think is really important when you're teaching a new skill and you're trying to encourage confidence, and that is, do not let the child make a mistake. So if the child starts to do something wrong, physically they start to do the wrong action, or verbally they start to answer a question incorrectly, you're going to interrupt them, give them the right answer, and then ask the question again. Why do you think I would recommend that?
Once someone on the spectrum does something wrong, they're gonna forget about it and walk away. They're never gonna do it again.
So that's one thing, is that kids on the spectrum typically are very averse to making a mistake. They don't like to erase things, they don't like to correct themselves. That's one reason. And the other reason is because in terms of human learning, when you learn something the wrong way, it's very hard to unlearn it. Think about like when you get a new cell phone and you have to learn your new phone number. You have to unlearn your own phone number. You know how hard that is, right? Remember that. Or let's say that you are at a party and you introduced someone and their name is Mary, and the next time you see them, you're like, I know your name is not Marie, but I want to call you Marie. What is your name? You've learned the wrong answer and now you have to unlearn it. It's very hard to unlearn the wrong answer. So to keep that from happening, we interrupt the wrong answer, provide the correct answer, and then ask again. Okay? I often tell teachers that if you do nothing else all day, it's to encourage these 6 communication messages. And that should be true during activities, camp, etc. When kids are at camp or sports or anything that they do, they need to be able to say these 6 things. I need help, I'm all done, no thanks, more please, bathroom, and break. And so we often will encourage camps and other organizations to create visuals for these things and have them in your, wherever you are, so that kids can remember that they can ask for these things and have a visual in case they need to use a visual to ask. Some teachers will institute signs for these things. I know a lot of classrooms do like a signal like this, like 5 means something, 4 means something, 3 means something, 2 means something, etc. But kids need to be able to say these things. And if you think about it, we talked earlier about to get or get away from. All of these take care of that, don't they? What is I need help, get or get away from? Get. What is more please? Get. I need a break,
Get away from
get
it.
away. No thanks,
Get away.
get away. I'm all done, get away. And bathroom please. Get and get away. That one's full, right? So if you can teach your kids to say these 6 things with a sign, a gesture, a picture, a hand signal, whatever you got, then you know that you're addressing a lot of the communication that they probably need to say in the moment during your session or your class or your lecture or your activity. Verbal rehearsal I mentioned a few minutes ago. This will be perfect for you guys. So let's say that you're about to engage in a scavenger hunt activity. You're going to review the rules verbally before you start. Who can tell me a rule for when we go on a scavenger hunt? Everybody has to stay in pairs of 2. Very good. Who can tell me another rule, right? So you're actually verbally rehearsing the rules before you engage in the activity. Okay, we're going to be working with scissors. Who can remind me of the rules about working with scissors and glue? I have to keep my scissors on the table. That's right. All of those things, right? We don't share scissors across tables. whatever it might be. So kids are verbally rehearsing and hearing the rules that they have to practice during that activity. So this is a really easy one to do, and it's something that you can make part of your routine. So, okay, we're about to leave the building and go outside. That's the perfect time to do verbal rehearsal, because once they're outside, it's harder to get their attention, right? So before you step out that door, we're going to review the rules for this activity. And then role play and scripting takes it to another level. Role play and scripting is to practice the rules. So remember I talked about bubblegum lips and marshmallow toes or whatever? Those kids knew what that meant because they had practiced it in class. They were literally going like this around the class practicing their marshmallow toes, right? So that's how kids understand what the rules are. It's not just to hear it, but to practice it too. And that's what role play is. And then there's prompting. So prompting is how we provide help to kids on the spectrum or with any kind of disability. And the only point I want to make here is that, as you can see, there are lots of different ways to prompt a kid. You want to prompt them doing the least amount of work possible, right? You want them to do as much of the work, and you're going to do as least of the work as possible, because otherwise, they're going to become very dependent on you, aren't they? Right? If you have to constantly help them do everything, they're just going to kick back and let you do everything, right? So the goal is, if you have to start by giving physical prompts, actually physically touching them to get them to follow through with something, you know that eventually you want to be able to back out of that picture, okay? Keeping in mind that a lot of times we forget about gestural prompts, right? That kind of thing. Or positional prompts, like pushing the thing that they need. Let's say they're doing an activity and they need a material. Instead of saying, pick up the such and such, you can just push it in their direction, right? So there are other ways to provide prompts and help and hints without being right on top of the kids. And that's what we want, because we want them to feel as independent as possible. Especially in your situation where they're supposed to be exploring new types of activities and trying to learn new skills, right? We want them to be as independent as possible. All right, which of the following is a teaching strategy? Verbal rehearsal or verbal reprimand? Verbal rehearsal, verbal rehearsal. And what is verbal rehearsal again? Going over what you're going to do before you do it. Okay, we're going to go out into the, into the woods now to look for such and such. What are the rules, etc. Okay. All right, and then lastly, we're going to talk about responding. Right. So we talked about some ways to prevent behavior. That's addressing the antecedent. And we talked about ways to teach new skills. That addresses the behavior itself. Now we're going to focus on the C part, or the consequence, and the way that you manipulate a consequence in a situation is through how you respond to behavior. And we're going to focus on the positive ways of responding, or reinforcement. So the key to reinforcement is giving something to the child that they want, that they're going to work to get, right? So as we said before, I might say to you, oh, I know you like Starbucks, so if you work an extra 60 hours this week, would that be okay if I gave you a $5 Starbucks card? Is that going to be okay with you? Not really, no, right? So it doesn't matter how much you love Starbucks. If the effort's not worth the payoff, you're not going to do it, right? So that's true of all reinforcement, is that the effort has to be worth the payoff, and that's what we mean by reinforcement. It's not what you think will increase the behavior. Oh, well, I know he really likes M&Ms, so I guess I'm going to give him some M&Ms if he does this thing. It's not what you think will reinforce his behavior. It's what he will work to achieve. It's not what he likes. It's what he's willing to change his behavior to get. So you're telling me that I'm not allowed to scream when I want your attention, and now I have to raise my hand or say your name. You got to make that worth my while when I'm learning how to do it. And if that's really hard for me, then giving me a half of a Skittle is not going to be enough, right? So the thought is, what does the kid like? But more than that, more importantly than that, what is he willing to change his behavior to get or work for? Keep in mind that we often think about edibles and tangibles as the things kids want to work for. They're going to work for candy, they're going to work for soda, they're going to work for a toy or iPad time or something like that, right? But there are also other ways to reward kids. And one of my favorite ways that would be accessible to you guys is through privileges. So being able to be a special helper, or be the line leader, or be the one who carries the bucket with all of the things that we find on our treasure hunt, etc., etc. So think outside the box in terms of the ways that you might reward a kid or motivate a kid. It's not just about chucking some Skittles at them, right? There's other ways to motivate kids too. Another concept that we use a lot, and this requires a visual component, is what we call a token system. A token system is basically teaching a kid that when they accumulate a certain number of tokens, they get to cash it in for a reward. It's not unlike your Starbucks frequent flyer card or the card that I have for Delights that costs me $5 every time I take my kid there, but if I go there 10 times, I get a $5 scoop for free. So this is the sort of thing we're trying to say to the kid, is that I need you, not only am I going to occasionally give you something that you want, but if you accrue enough positive behavior, there'll be a positive outcome for that. So for older kids, I tend to use like a stamp sort of system where they have to get 15 stamps on their little cards. The way that I like to introduce this concept is with a puzzle. So if kids are used to doing the behavior and getting their reward, and now you're saying there's going to be a delay before this happens, you're going to introduce the tokens, right? So you might start by saying, this was a kid who was working to watch Kermit the Frog on YouTube. That's what he wanted to earn, right? So instead of just turning on YouTube like I used to do to reward him, I'm going to hand him the picture of Kermit the Frog. He has to turn it back into me, and then he gets his YouTube. Once he's able to do that, I can cut the picture in half. He has to earn 2 pieces of Kermit the Frog until it's complete, turn it into me, and then he gets his YouTube, and so on and so on. And so essentially, 1, 2, 3, that's got 15 pieces on it. So he's got to earn 15 times before he gets his TV time now. Does that make sense? So what you're doing is teaching delayed reinforcement. This is something that you might use with the kids that come to your camps and your events. But what you're probably more likely to use is this, which is what we call a group contingency. So this means that as a group, when you catch a child in the group doing the right thing, the whole group earns, okay? And the way you illustrate that can be by filling up a fishbowl with pom-poms or by filling up a jar or something, right? There are also apps for this, so you can have it on your phone that they're earning a certain number of things. And then once the group as a whole has collectively done enough rewardable behaviors, they all get something special, like a popcorn party or 15 minutes to have a dance party at the end of class or whatever it might be, okay? Another idea that we use for reinforcement is contracting. To be able to say, okay, I, the child, agree to do this thing, and I, the adult, agree to reward you in this way. And for some kids, this is really powerful because it puts it, again, in black and white to say, this is what I'm earning if I do what I've been asked to do. There's another concept called negative reinforcement. So when we think about reinforcement, we think about getting something that we want, right? But there's another kind of reinforcement, and that is negative reinforcement, which means that my reward for doing what you wanted me to do is that I don't have to do something I don't want to do. So for example, in a classroom situation, it might be, if you do the first 10 problems, you don't have to do the other 10. In the home, it might be, if you wash the dishes, you don't have to take out the trash, right? So your reward for doing the behavior is to get out of doing something you don't want to do. And we call that negative reinforcement. This might be really helpful if you've got a kid who's got a bunch of activities in a row that are going to be challenging for him. If you can do this first one, you don't have to do this second thing, okay? The key about reinforcement is that you want to think about what has worked in the past, right? You want to think openly about what I have available to me to make this kid be successful. Keeping in mind that it might not be during your class or camp day or whatever. It might be that you report back to the parents and they're the ones who supply the reward at home. So if the kid does X amount of positive behaviors during your class or your session or your activity or your event, then they go home and they get to have a reward at that point. So it's not always about you guys providing the reward if that's not appropriate. You also want to remember that when you do offer something as a reward, it's got to be something that the kid wants. And one of the ways that you want something is that you haven't had it in a while. So if you have pizza for breakfast and lunch and dinner, and then I say, hey, if you clean your room, you can have pizza for dessert, that's probably not going to go over that well, right? Because I'm not desiring that thing because I'm satiated on it. I've had it too much recently, okay? And then the perceived value, again. So if you're asking a kid to participate in an activity that they don't like for 30 minutes, and as a reward, you're going to give them half of a Starburst, probably not going to go for that, right? Because that's too much of a That's not enough of a reward for the expected demand. Remember that something is reinforcing when a person is willing to change their behavior to get it. This is different than a preference. You can reinforce the presence of appropriate behavior, and you can also reinforce the absence of inappropriate behavior. So in addition to rewarding a kid for being on task, you can also reward a kid for not yelling out, or not touching the other kids, or not running away. All these things that you don't want to see, you can reward a kid for that too. And then you can also increase the power of a reward by offering it as a choice. So you can say, okay, here's the activity. If you do this activity, do you want to earn this thing or this thing? And by offering the reward as a choice, you're making it even more powerful because you know that they're going to be motivated to earn the thing that they picked out themselves. All right, an example of negative reinforcement is getting candy for completing a math worksheet or no math homework for completing a math worksheet. Right, very good. So I'm getting out of an activity that I don't want to do, math homework, as a reward for doing my math worksheet in class. What's the first an example of? If this is an example of positive reinforcement, what's that? Negative reinforcement, what's that an example of? Positive, right? So you can think about positive as I'm putting something that you want into the environment, that's the positive part, and the reinforcement means the result is it makes the behavior go up. It reinforces the behavior. Negative is I'm taking something out of the environment, negative, right, that you don't want, and the result is the behavior still goes up, reinforcement. The opposite of that is punishment, which we're not getting into today. By child, that's a typo, I'm sorry, that should say children. So whenever a child comes into your situation, whether it's their first day at camp or their first day at your class or their session or their first day in a new class, your first day on a job, this applies to all people. The goal is to understand the expectations of that environment. So when they walk into your activity or your camp day or whatever it is, they're going to want to know where they're allowed to go and where they're not allowed to go. They're going to want to know, all right, I'm sitting at this table. You told me to come sit at the table. Now what do I do? Then, all right, I did the task you wanted me to do at the table. Now what do I do? What's next? What do I get if I do it? I did the activity you wanted me to do. What's my reward? If I don't do it, is there a consequence for that? What are my choices? Because hopefully there are always choices built into every activity. And then how do I ask for help? So no matter what kind of activity it is, if there's nothing else, you want to make sure that every kid knows how to and that they can ask for help. Because they're going to be more willing to try these new things you're exposing them to if they know that they can get help if they need it. Questions?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So please make sure that you take advantage of our Visual Supports Lab if you so desire, meaning that if you want visual cue cards or rule cards or token boards or schedule cards or whatever you want, we can make that for you. We can make it individualized to the activities that you guys do. Your activities are specific to what you do. So we'd be happy to make those kinds of things for you. I think I have, there we go. This is how you reach us. That's how you reach me over there. And this is how you reach the card office in general. The goal is that we want to be able to support your efforts. We really appreciate it when organizations such as yourselves come forward and say, we want more information about kids with special needs. So please let us continue to support you. This was just sort of a, one effort towards doing that. But we're happy to come to your, come to your classes, come to your camp sessions, come to whatever. We're happy to do other trainings. We're happy to make visuals for you, whatever would be of support to you. We appreciate you wanting to learn more about this population.
It's growing.
It is growing. So I would only ask that before you leave, you make sure that you signed in, because I have to take a copy of that sign-in sheet, and that you fill out the evaluation form that's in front of you, so that I can make sure that when we do organizational trainings like this in the future, they are meaningful to you, and then I think you're free to go.